Hello, I'm your instructor Alex Medina, and I'll keep this introduction short since you guys know me already from the first video of the series. I'm currently a senior hard surface artist at Crytek, specializing in weapon art but with a background in prop and environment art. In this second lesson of the series, we will kickstart the work on the tutorial weapon, the Enfield No. 2 revolver. We will go from the planning stage, where we will discuss the steps to take over the course of the next two tutorials, to the final high poly of our weapon. In between, we will showcase the process behind the reference gathering, and also explain the add-ons we will employ, as well as basic concepts about procedural base mesh creation. We will also delve deep into the most useful modifiers we will be using to enhance our modeling techniques. Then, we will go on a lengthy tour of the base mesh modeling, explaining in detail the thought processes behind the most important steps and decisions. After the base mesh is done, we will explain how to create quick animations inside Blender to check that the weapon's moving pieces work well together. Finally, we will explain a bit of theory about high polys and subdivision methods, culminating in a live demo where I will obtain the final high poly model of the Enfield revolver. Now that we know what we are about to face, let's get started. Planning our model. In this first chapter of the course, we will kickstart the planning and pre-production stage of the tutorial weapon. We will plan the steps to take over the next chapters of the series and start by compiling the weapon references in PureRef. In these next two parts of this series, we will be working on the Enfield No. 2, a British 38 caliber top break revolver, manufactured from 1930 to 1957. A bit of history. It was the standard Commonwealth sidearm in World War II, alongside other revolvers like the Webley Mark IV and Smith & Wesson Victory. This makes it one of the last revolvers used by a major military power at a time where everyone else was adopting automatic pistols instead. We will work on two variants. The first is the pre-war Mark I, which was a full spur hammer and is double action, single action, meaning the shooter could cock the hammer with the thumb before pulling the trigger, since the trigger pull is much lighter with the hammer cocked, resulting in more accuracy, or pull the trigger with the hammer uncocked in an emergency close quarters situation. The hand grips are smaller and made of wood. This is the version that was made until 1939. The second variant is the Mark II, which has a spurless hammer and is double action only, meaning that the hammer cannot be thumb cocked by the shooter for each shot. It has traditionally been viewed as for use by armored crew, where the lack of a spur meant there was one less thing to catch on items inside the tank. Additionally, in keeping with the revolver's purpose as a close-range weapon, the hand grips, now made of plastic, are redesigned a bit taller to improve the grip when used in rapid double-action fire. The one we will model also has a snub-nosed 2-inch barrel. Their differences include only three parts: the hand grip, hammer, and barrel, which makes them perfect examples to showcase our modular weapon workflow. We will make each barrel and grip in a separate texture set, and another one for the cylinder and frame, including both hammer types. This being mostly a Blender tutorial, we won't go deep into some aspects of game weapons, like the engine integration, but I will model the LODs to give you guys an insight on how they are done in the industry and some tips and tricks. It is important to plan the steps to take before starting any 3D project, and this tutorial series is not any different. The first step will be to compile and organize our references. A comprehensive set of references is extremely important and will become the foundation of everything we will go through later. We will need images of each and every one of the gun's pieces, and also bookmark some videos to see them in movement. Our project will be limited to replicating a real-life weapon, so no concept art will be needed. We will follow this by executing the weapon's base mesh model. Our focus will be nailing the shapes as exactly as we can, and I will explain how to keep them procedural so we can easily derive the high and low poly models from this initial mesh. Next, we will tackle the high poly model itself by subdividing the base mesh using any method we choose. On the final lesson of the series, we will collapse, clean up, and optimize the base mesh to obtain the final low poly. We will go over concepts like silhouette, proper mesh shading, and baking preparation. Later, we will move on to the UV unwrapping and packing, and finally bake our model in Marmoset Toolbag. And as our last step in the series, we will obtain the weapon's LODs. So, without further ado, let's start with the references of our revolver. Since the whole gathering of images is a very time-consuming task, I have already done it. Here are the results. First of all, on the left we have our two revolver variants, which we will model in parallel by swapping their modular parts. Then we have the main references, the ones we will regularly come to when we need some clarification while modeling. Notice that they are grouped for easier inspection. Grouping is the best way to organize images inside PureRef. We don't only group up images from the same source, but also by concept, like different models, pieces, blueprints, etc. Labeling our groups with Ctrl-N for notes is also important. As soon as we have to deal with many groups, it's better to label them for our sanity's sake. Below, we find our texture references. These have been picked because they display a range of materials or smaller details that might be interesting to us while texturing. A special kind of these are the markings references, which we can use to enhance the realism of our weapons and position them in a specific time and place. We can usually extract stencils from these and apply them directly into our textures. On the right, we find references for specific details of our revolvers. The ammunition is a very important one. Bullets will be very well seen during reloading because of the break action mechanism in these weapons. We also have a specific section for pistol grips due to their great variety in shapes, materials, and finishes. Below, we have detailed pictures of more complex mechanisms, like the hammer and cylinder. Also, how the revolver looks when it's open, which is great to check if our pieces interact properly together. Finally, we also have groups for blueprints, weapon variants, and even official operation manuals. So, where do we find such good references? Well, the weapon manufacturer's page is a great resource if the gun is relatively modern or still being manufactured, even as a replica. Marketing shots are usually really sharp and high resolution, and PDF operation manuals give us a treasure trove of information about the weapons. Auction sites are also amazing to find really good references of all kinds of older weapons, alongside some history about where they have been or who owned them. This can even help us a bit with the storytelling in our textures and renders. Finally, here are some file organization tips. In the File Explorer, create a ref folder inside our projects folder, and dump everything there at first. Before importing to PureRef, check for duplicate images. They are difficult to spot once they are inside the collage. Drag files into PureRef in batches, so they are easier to sort and group inside the file. Photo groups coming from the same site will have a naming convention, and will normally show up together in the File Explorer. If we just dump everything into PureRef at the same time, we will need to sort the mess out manually. It can be a very long and tedious process if we have a big amount of pictures, so try to be smart about it. When we have a good look at our references inside PureRef and decide which ones are the best to model from, find these files and move them outside the big reference folder. This way, they will be easier to drag into Blender, and to find again in case we need to modify them in some way, maybe correct their perspective a bit, or to fix broken image references. We might need some more down the line for any reason. Do not just download them into the existing reference folder. We won't know which ones are old or new, and PureRef can easily fill out with duplicate images if we are not tidy. We can download the files to a temporary location like the desktop, drag them into PureRef, and then put them in the reference folder. To wrap up this planning chapter, and before we start with the actual modeling, let's introduce some Blender add-ons we will use during the next phases. The first one is BoolTool, which is already included in the base version of Blender. We can go to Preferences and activate it. This add-on streamlines the Boolean modeling workflow by adding shortcuts for the three kinds of Boolean operations in both destructive and non-destructive modes: addition, subtraction, and intersection. It also helps us by changing the visibility parameters of the operands into just their bounding boxes, so they stay out of the way visually speaking. This can be reverted temporarily by going into Edit mode, or permanently by changing their viewport display option inside the Object Properties side panel. Finally, BoolTool also renames the Boolean modifier with the name of the object we used, which gives us a better overview of our booleans in the modifier stack. Next, we have the Modifier List add-on. This add-on is also free, but it is not included in Blender, so we will have to download it from GitHub. Modifier List offers a customizable user interface for our modifiers. It allows the modifiers to be seen as a list, just like in 3ds Max, which is way more useful when working with a big number of modifiers, like for instance a lot of booleans. It also makes it easier to reorganize modifiers within the stack. By default, Blender does this via drag and drop, and this is not ideal for big modifier stacks. Another useful feature is adding shortcut buttons to quickly add our favorite modifiers with a single click. But even after all this, I still think by far the best feature of this add-on is the ability to set default modifier values, which will save us a ton of repetitive clicks when adding new modifiers. Some examples of values to set up are enabling weld in screw modifiers, reducing the default bevel amount since we will work with small pieces, enabling high-quality normals and even thickness in the solidify modifier, and the biggest time saver of all, adding the proper configuration to the remesh and smooth corrective modifiers, so we can obtain high polys with 2 clicks. One final useful tip: when updating the modifier to a new version, do not uninstall the previous one. This way, we will keep our configuration. The last add-on we will use at this stage is Interactive Tools, from developer Maxi Vazquez, which is also free on GitHub. There are many cool functions in this add-on, but these are the ones I use the most. Quick Origin, to set the object's pivot to our selection. It also works with multiple sub-objects selected, in which case the pivot will be set in between them. Quick Lattice, which streamlines the lattice creation process by automatically adapting to the bounding box of our selection. And finally, Radial Symmetry, which speeds up the creation of radial arrays by a lot, since it usually takes quite a bit of configuration.